The twin suns of Valera Prime cast long purple shadows across the devastated landscape as Kira limped toward the sacred cliffs. Blood, silvery blue against her alabaster skin, trickled from the wound in her side where shrapnel had struck when the human missiles destroyed her clan's final shelter. She was the last, the only one who had crawled from the rubble when the attack ended. Now, as tradition demanded, she would complete the Kiltara, the honorable ending when all hope had fled. The war between humans and Valorans had raged for 3 years, beginning when the human colonists had refused to abandon the resource-rich moons that Valorans had held sacred for millennia. What started as diplomatic tension had escalated into full-scale slaughter when extremists on both sides took matters into their own hands. Kira's four-fingered hand clutched the ceremonial crystal her mother had pressed into her palm before drawing her final breath. The translucent stone caught the fading light, fracturing it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. "When you can fight no more," her mother had whispered, "let this guide your spirit back to the stars." The cliff edge loomed before her now, a sheer drop of nearly 1,000 meters ending in jagged rock formations below, the most sacred place for the final passage. Kira's slender frame shuddered as she sank to her knees, her large, iridescent eyes, with their distinctive vertical pupils, gazing upward at the emerging stars. "Ancestors, I come to join you," she whispered in the musical tones of her native language. "My fight is done." She struggled to her feet, swaying slightly as the blood loss made her dizzy. The ceremonial words felt hollow without her clan to witness them, but she spoke them anyway, her voice carrying across the empty canyon. Lieutenant Elias Hayes checked his life sign detector again, frowning at the faint signal pulsing from the direction of the cliffs. Command had assured all units that Sector 7 was completely evacuated. All surviving Valorans had either surrendered or retreated to their strongholds in the northern continent. "Command, this is Recon 6, he said into his communicator. "I'm picking up a life sign near Ridge Point. Request permission to investigate." The response was immediate and firm. "Negative, Lieutenant. Extraction shuttles launch in 40 minutes. Return to checkpoint immediately." Elias hesitated, looking toward the distant cliff face glowing purple in the sunset. Something didn't feel right. "Copy that," he said finally, but switched off his tracker. Adjusting his pack, he made the impulsive decision that would change his life forever. Not for the first time, he questioned his role in this conflict. He had enlisted to protect his people, not to exterminate another species. The massacres of the past months had left him hollow. As he approached the ridge, he spotted a slender figure silhouetted against the darkening sky, unmistakably Valoran, with the characteristic crest running from forehead to the nape of the neck. The alien stood precariously at the cliff edge, arms outstretched. Elias broke into a run, his heart hammering in his chest. He had studied enough Valoran culture during intelligence training to recognize a Kiltara ritual when he saw one. "Wait," he called out, fumbling to recall the Valoran word. "K-Vash, stop." The Valoran female turned, clearly startled by his voice. For a moment their eyes locked across the distance, her large, luminous eyes widening in surprise. Then, whether from her wound or the shock of his presence, she swayed dangerously close to the edge. Without thinking, Elias lunged forward, his hand catching her slender wrist just as she began to fall. The momentum nearly pulled them both over, but he braced himself against a rock outcropping, pulling her slight form back from the abyss with desperate strength. They collapsed together on the rocky ground, her silvery blood staining his uniform. Up close, he could see she was young, perhaps equivalent to a human in her early 20s and grievously injured. "I've got you," he said softly, struggling to form the Valoran words he'd learned. "Esavan, safe now." Her eyes, the color of amethysts, regarded him with confusion and fear. She said something rapidly in her language that he couldn't follow. Carefully, Elias removed his thermal jacket and wrapped it around her trembling shoulders. It was a gesture no Valoran would understand. Her people rarely touched, even among family. "I'm Elias," he said, pointing to himself before slowly reaching out to examine her wound. "Let me help you." When his fingers gently touched the skin near her injury, she gasped, not in pain but in apparent shock at the contact itself. Yet she didn't pull away. As night fell over the cliffs of Valera Prime, two enemies sat together under alien stars, their futures now impossibly entangled. Dawn broke harsh and unforgiving over the makeshift shelter Elias had constructed in the abandoned mining outpost. 3 days had passed since he'd rescued the Valoran female from the cliff's edge. 3 days since he deliberately missed his extraction shuttle, becoming, in the eyes of Earth Command, either missing in action or a deserter. He didn't regret his choice. Kira, he'd finally understood her name from their halting attempts at communication, lay on his sleeping pallet, her breathing steady but shallow. The field medical kit had barely been sufficient to treat her wounds, but her people's remarkable regenerative abilities were finally taking over. Water, Elias said softly, offering a canteen as her eyes fluttered open. He'd learned that word in her language, Nalva. She regarded him with those unsettling vertical-pupilled eyes before accepting the canteen. Their fingers brushed, and again she startled at the contact, but didn't recoil as she had the first dozen times. Why, she asked in heavily accented English, surprising him. It was the first human word she'd spoken. Why save enemy? The question pierced him deeper than he expected. I'm not sure we were ever meant to be enemies, he replied, knowing she might not understand all his words. He searched for simpler terms. Not want you die, wrong. Kira sat up, wincing slightly. The iridescent patterns on her skin, natural markings that Valorans were born with, seemed to pulse faintly with her emotions. My people say, Kultara is honor, you took honor. Elias shook his head, struggling to bridge not just the language gap, but the vast cultural chasm between them. On Earth, saving life is honor. Her expression changed subtly, the crest along her scalp flattening slightly, a sign of contemplation he'd learned from his cultural briefings. Earth ways, strange, she gestured to the thermal blanket wrapped around her slender shoulders. My people never touch, only mates touch, but you. Elias felt heat rise to his face. I'm sorry, I didn't know. No, she interrupted, surprising him again. Is not bad, different. Her four-fingered hand reached out hesitantly, hovering just above his forearm. Can I learn Earthway? Heart racing unexpectedly, Elias nodded. When her cool fingers finally settled on his skin, he realized this wasn't just cultural exchange. It was something far more intimate for her species. A boundary crossed that could never be uncrossed. I stay hidden. Command believes I dead, she said, her grammar improving with each exchange. You should go, return humans. Not without you, he replied firmly. There's a neutral settlement on the southern continent. Humans and Valorans live there together, away from the war. Her eyes widened. Not possible. Elias pulled out his digital maps. It exists. We can reach it in 10 days if we're careful. Her expression clouded. I am Kvareth clanless, no place for me anywhere. In a gesture that surprised them both, Elias gently took her hand. You have a place with me if you want it. When she didn't pull away, something shifted between them, fragile as morning light but undeniably real. Later that evening, as they shared their meager rations, Kira slowly began to tell him about her people's traditions, about the beauty of Valoran music festivals before the war, about the sacred moons that humans had inadvertently desecrated. In return, Elias spoke of Earth's oceans, of rain, forests, and snowfall, wonders her desert-evolved species had never experienced. As night fell, they sat closer than necessary, the warmth of human and the cool of Valoran balanced perfectly between them. When Kira finally drifted to sleep, her head rested tentatively against his shoulder, a position that would scandalize her entire species. Elias remained awake, watching the alien stars through the shelter's small window, wondering at the strange path fate had chosen for him. Whatever came next, he knew with absolute certainty that he would protect her, even at the cost of never seeing his own world again. 2 weeks into their journey toward the neutral settlement, Elias and Kira sheltered in the hollow remnants of what had once been a Valoran temple. Outside, acid rain, a toxic byproduct of the warfare that had ravaged the planet, fell in sheets, filling the air with a caustic hiss. Earth rain not like this? Kira asked, watching droplets eat tiny craters into the stone where they landed through a breach in the ceiling. Elias smiled, leaning back against the ancient wall. No, Earth rain is life. You can stand in it, feel it on your skin. Children dance in it. Kira's expression softened, the luminescent patterns along her temples glowing faintly in the dim light. Over the past weeks, he'd learned to read these biological indicators of her emotions. This pattern meant something between curiosity and longing. "Show me," she said suddenly, rising to her feet with unexpected grace. Her wounds had nearly healed, leaving only faint silver marks across her alabaster skin. "What the rain? I can't, it's toxic." "No," she stepped closer, extending her four-fingered hands. "Show me how children dance." Something caught in Ilia's throat as he took her hands. They were cooler than human hands, smooth and slightly firmer with a subtle texture like fine suede. Touch between them had evolved from clinical necessity to cautious comfort, but this was different, deliberate seeking. "I'm not much of a dancer," he warned, but placed one hand lightly on her waist, keeping the other clasped with hers. The position brought them closer than they'd ever stood before. Slowly he began to sway, humming a simple melody his mother had once sung. Kira followed his movements tentatively at first, then with increasing confidence, her natural valor and grace making up for his awkward steps. "Your heart beats faster than mine," she observed, her face just inches from his. "Two rhythms." Ilias wasn't sure if she meant their different physiologies or something else entirely, but he found himself mesmerized by the subtle shifts of color in her eyes, violet to indigo to something deeper that had no name in human language. "Kira," he began, not knowing what would follow her name. The moment shattered as the temple floor suddenly groaned beneath them. Centuries of war damage combined with the corrosive rain had compromised the structure. Without warning, the stone gave way, plunging them into darkness. Ilias landed hard, pain shooting through his leg. Dust and debris rained down around him. "Kira," he shouted, panic rising when no answer came. Then he felt her cool hands on his face, her superior night vision allowing her to find him in the pitch darkness. "I am here, Ilias." He coughed, trying to move. "My leg, I think it's broken." Her hands moved with surprising expertise over his injury. "Yes, broken." There was a pause, then determination in her voice. "I will heal you." "You can't set a human bone," he began, but stopped when her hands began to emit a soft, bluish glow. The pain in his leg immediately dulled. "Valoran healers can share life energy," she explained, her voice strained with effort. "Not done for outsiders, forbidden, but you gave me life, I return." Warmth spread through his injured limb as Kira's luminescent patterns brightened, channeling some biological process human science had never documented. The sensation was intimate beyond anything physical, as if she were sharing not just energy, but fragments of herself, memories, emotions, essence. When it was over, she collapsed against him, exhausted but satisfied. His leg, while not fully healed, had been substantially mended, enough that he could walk with her support. "Why did you do that?" he asked as they navigated through the temple's underground chambers, seeking an exit. "Your people would consider it sacrilege." In the faint light filtering from above, he saw her expression, vulnerable yet resolved. "My people's ways led to war, to Kiltara, perhaps time for new ways." They found their way out as dawn broke, the acid rain finally subsiding. Standing in the pink light of morning, leaning against each other for balance, Kira did something unprecedented. She reached up and traced the contour of Ilia's jaw with gentle fingers. "In Valoran tradition, sharing life energy creates envali, soul bond," she said softly. "Cannot be broken." Ilias covered her hand with his own, keeping it against his face. "And how do you feel about that?" Her eyes, luminous in the early light, met his without reservation, like learning to breathe again. Later, as they continued their journey across the scarred landscape, they walked closer than before, their hands occasionally brushing in a gesture that bridged two worlds. The abandoned research station offered a final haven before the most dangerous leg of their journey to the neutral settlement. Nestled between sheer cliff faces, it provided both shelter and vantage points to spot approaching threats, whether military patrols or the predatory creatures that had adapted to the war-ravaged environment. 3 days rest, Ilias said, examining the facility's security systems. Then we crossed the deadlands. Kira nodded, arranging their meager supplies in the station's main laboratory. A month on the run had changed her profoundly. The formal rigidity of Valoran posture had softened. She moved with a blend of her species' natural grace and a new, adaptable confidence. Her English had improved dramatically, though she still occasionally slipped into musical Valoran when emotions ran high. That evening, they discovered the station's water recycling system still functioned. For the first time in weeks, they could properly wash away the grime of their journey. You first, Elias offered, showing her how to operate the shower. When she emerged later, her alabaster skin seemed to glow with renewed luster, the iridescent patterns along her temples and spine pulsing with vivid colors he'd never seen before. She'd found a research technician's jumpsuit that she'd modified to accommodate her slightly different physiology. Your turn, she said, a hint of shyness in her voice. The hot water was as close to heaven as Elias had experienced since leaving Earth. When he returned to the main living space, Kira had prepared a meal from their rations and some edible native plants she'd identified outside the station. They ate in comfortable silence for a while before Kira spoke. Tomorrow marks the Valoran solstice, the night of revelations. A holiday? Elias asked. Sacred time when truths must be spoken. Her eyes, those mesmerizing violet depths, met his across the small table. In better times, it was when bonds were declared or broken, when futures were chosen. Something in her tone made his heart quicken. The connection between them had evolved beyond rescuer and rescued, beyond cultural exchange, into territory neither of them had dared name. What truths would you speak? He asked softly. Kira rose gracefully and moved to the observation window, gazing at the planet's 3 moons rising over the distant mountains. My people believe the soul recognizes its complement instantly, but wisdom takes time to accept what the soul knows. She turned to him. Do humans believe this? Elias joined her by the window, close enough to feel the slight coolness that radiated from her skin. Some do. We call it love at first sight, but most think love grows slowly. And what do you believe, Elias Hayes? His name and her voice had always affected him strangely. The slight musical inflection she gave it transforming the ordinary into something precious. I believe, he said carefully, that sometimes the universe brings together what should never have met, creating something beautiful in its impossibility. Her luminescent patterns brightened, a cascade of colors signaling emotions he was still learning to read. With deliberate slowness, she raised her hand to his face, her palm cool against his cheek in the gesture that had become their private language. The en-volley between us grows stronger, she whispered. I feel you even when we don't touch. It was true. Since the day she had healed him, a subtle awareness had formed between them, an ability to sense each other's presence, sometimes even emotions, across distances. Is that normal for your people? He asked, his voice husky. No, the bond is rare even between Valorans, between species, unprecedented. Her fingers traced the line of his jaw. Does it frighten you? In answer, Elias leaned forward, closing the final distance between them. Their first kiss was cautious, exploratory, the meeting of 2 biologies never intended to connect. Her lips were cooler than a human's, with a subtle sweetness unlike anything he'd known. When they parted, Kira's eyes had darkened to a deep indigo, her patterns pulsing rapidly. Show me, she whispered. Show me how humans express the bond. That night, they discovered both the differences and surprising harmonies between their species. Her touch, once hesitant, became bold with newfound purpose. Where human passion burned hot, Valoran desire was an expanding intensity that built in spiraling waves. The en-volley between them amplified every sensation, creating feedback loops of pleasure that transcended physical boundaries. Afterward, lying together in the silver moonlight, Kira traced patterns on his chest that mirrored her own luminescent markings. The Valoran word for what we've done is T-Zoral, the merging of life forces. Elias kissed her forehead where her delicate crest began. On Earth, we just call it making love. She smiled at that, a gesture she'd learned from him. Earth has wisdom after all. Their peaceful interlude shattered at dawn with the distant sound of aircraft engines. They rushed to the observation deck to see military transports on the horizon, human vessels approaching from the west, Valoran ships from the east. They're converging on the Deadlands, Elias said grimly, studying the flight patterns. Exactly where we need to cross. Kira's expression hardened, her warrior heritage evident in her posture. The ceasefire must have collapsed. They gathered their supplies with practiced efficiency, the intimacy of the night before giving way to the harsh reality of their situation. As they prepared to leave the station, Elias caught Kira by the wrist, pulling her into a fierce embrace. Whatever happens, he said against her silver-white hair, we stay together, promise me. Her arms tightened around him, strength belying her slender frame. En-volley cannot be broken, she replied, Not by war, not by death. Where you go, I follow. Hand in hand, they stepped out into the blood-red dawn, facing the coming storm together. The Deadlands lived up to their name, a wasteland of twisted metal and glassy, fused sand where the war's most devastating weapons had been deployed. Radiation lingered in pockets, requiring careful navigation with Elia's detector. Above them, occasional aircraft from both sides crisscrossed the sky, searching for enemy movements. 2 more kilometers, Elias whispered, consulting the map projected from his wrist device. Their progress had been painfully slow, 3 days to cover ground that should have taken hours. Kira nodded, her natural camouflage ability, the subtle shifting of her skin tones to match surroundings, helping to keep them hidden. She tensed suddenly, her head tilting in that distinctive Valoran way that indicated she was sensing something beyond human perception. Patrol, she breathed, coming from the east, Valoran. They ducked behind the twisted hulk of what had once been a battle tank. Moments later, 3 Valoran soldiers appeared, moving with the fluid grace characteristic of their species. Unlike Kira, these warriors wore the crimson markings of the separatist faction, extremists who opposed any peace with humans. Elias felt Kira's grip on his arm tighten. Through their bond, he sensed her conflict. These were her people, yet no longer her people. One of the Valorans stopped, nostrils flaring. Their species had a keen sense of smell, particularly for their own kind. The soldier turned, looking directly toward their hiding place. Kavarik Neshel, the soldier called out, show yourself in the Valoran tongue. Before Elias could stop her, Kira stood, stepping out into view. He followed immediately, unwilling to let her face them alone. The Valoran soldiers reacted with shock, first at seeing one of their own, then with disgust as they noted her proximity to a human. The leader, a male with elaborate battle scars across his crest, addressed her sharply. Tizorakai human, Virakal Shah. His tone made the meaning clear even to Elias, an accusation of betrayal. Kira responded in rapid Valoran, her posture proud despite the weapons now aimed at them both. Elias caught only fragments, mentions of the neutral settlement, of peace, of a future. The leader spat on the ground. Kavarath, he hissed, the same word Kira had once used to describe herself, clanless, outcast. What happened next occurred too quickly for Elias to fully process. The leader raised his weapon, but Kira moved with lightning speed, her combat training evident as she disarmed him with a precise strike. The other soldiers fired, but she pulled Elias down, the energy bolts passing overhead. They ran, zigzagging through the debris field as shots continued to track them. Reaching a steep gully, they slid down its side just as the air filled with a new sound, the distinctive whine of human aircraft. The Valoran patrol scattered as missiles struck nearby, the human forces apparently targeting the energy signatures of the Valoran weapons. In the chaos, Elias and Kira crawled through a drainage pipe, emerging on the other side coated in mud but alive. They continued throughout the night, pushing their bodies to the limit. Dawn found them standing at the edge of a valley where small structures dotted the landscape below, the neutral settlement at last. But between them and safety lay an open expanse with no cover. As they prepared to make their final dash, the sky darkened with approaching craft from both sides, a full-scale battle converging directly overhead. Now or never, Elias said, gripping Kira's hand. They ran as energy weapons and projectiles filled the air above them. Halfway across the open ground, a stray shot struck near their feet, the explosion throwing them both forward. Elias felt searing pain in his back, but Kira pulled him up, half carrying him as they stumbled toward the settlement's perimeter. Figures appeared ahead, some human, some Valoran, all armed but not wearing military insignia. The settlement's defense force. Asylum, Kira cried out in English, then repeated it in Valoran. We seek asylum. The defenders hesitated, then a Valoran female stepped forward, her markings indicating she was a healer. Behind her, a human man with the distinctive features of Asian ancestry gestured for the others to lower their weapons. Bring them inside the shield, the human ordered. As they crossed the threshold, a translucent energy barrier hummed to life behind them, deflecting a stray missile that would have struck near their position. Elias collapsed then, the pain overwhelming his senses. He woke later in a simple room where light filtered through crystalline windows, Valoran architecture blended with human furnishings. Kira sat beside him, her cool hand entwined with his. When she saw he was awake, the patterns across her skin pulsed with joy. "The healer says you will recover fully," she said, leaning down to press her forehead against his, a Valoran gesture of profound connection. "We made it, Ilias." The door opened to admit the Valoran healer and the human man who had welcomed them. Up close, Ilias could see they both wore identical pendants, two intertwined symbols, one human, one Valoran. "I am Director Taro," the human said, "and this is Lifemender Nelara. Welcome to Haven's Crossing." "You are the 20th pair to seek sanctuary this year," Nelara added, her English accented but fluent. "The war drives more to our doors each month." "Pair?" Ilias asked, still groggy from medication. Director Taro smiled. "Those with the Envali bond, we recognize the signs." He exchanged a meaningful glance with Nelara. "We were the first nearly a decade ago." Ilias looked at Kira in wonder. Even without the bond, he would have read the emotion in her eyes. Hope, belonging, and something deeper that transcended human or Valoran expression. In the days that followed, they learned the settlement had begun with just 5 couples, human Valoran pairs who had found each other despite the war. Now nearly 200 residents lived and worked together, developing hybrid technologies and sustainable farming practices. They maintained neutrality through complex shield technology and diplomatic arrangements with moderates on both sides. One evening, 6 weeks after their arrival, Kira led Ilias to the settlement's highest point, a bluff overlooking both the colony and the distant, still-ravaged landscape beyond its protective shields. The 3 moons hung low in the sky, bathing everything in silver light. "Tonight marks a full lunar alignment," she said, removing a small pouch from her pocket. "A time when Valorans traditionally formalize life bonds." From the pouch, she withdrew 2 objects, a crystal similar to the one she had once intended to use for her Kiltara, now set into a pendant, and a simple band woven from iridescent Valoran fibers and sturdy human-made cord. "On the cliff, I was ready to return this crystal to the cosmos along with my spirit," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Now I offer it as a symbol of the life we found instead." She placed the pendant around his neck, the crystal warm against his skin, somehow resonating with their bond. In turn, Ilias took the woven band and tied it gently around her wrist, where her patterns swirled to meet it. "Where I'm from, we make vows," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I vow to walk beside you between worlds beyond boundaries for all our days." Kira's eyes shimmered in the moonlight. "And I vow to cherish what should never have been possible, the joining of stars that were never meant to align." Their kiss sealed promises that no formal ceremony on either world could have sanctified. Above them, the skies of Valera Prime glittered with ancient light, witnessing the birth of something new, a future neither human nor Valoran, but a unique constellation all its own. In the valley below, more lights appeared as other residents emerged for the lunar celebration, dozens of couples like them, creating their own traditions from the fragments of 2 worlds. Children, some human, some Valoran, some adopted across species lines, danced with illuminated streamers. Ilias wrapped his arm around Kira's waist, feeling the subtle pulse of her life force harmonizing with his own. "Is this what you saw that day on the cliff?" he asked, "when you chose to live?" She leaned against him, her luminescence brightening with contentment. "No," she answered honestly. "This is more than I dared imagine possible." She turned to face him fully, framed against the 3 moons and countless stars. "This is what happens when we choose to fall differently, not into death, but into each other." Together they descended toward the lights and music of the celebration. 2 beings who had journeyed from the edge of despair to build a life beyond the horizon of what either of their worlds had envisioned. A testament to the possibility that even in the darkest times, unexpected grace could rewrite the ending of a story that seemed already written. The war would continue beyond their sanctuary, but with each new arrival, each shared discovery, each child who grew up knowing both worlds as one, the foundations of a different future took root and reached skyward. A future where the distance between stars was not a barrier, but merely the space needed for new constellations to form.